Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Podcast Digest. My name's Dan Lizette. Thanks for coming back, taking the time to listen. This is episode 138. Great conversation, and I really hope that you enjoy it. Before we get started, I want to take just a quick moment. Thank all those folks wonderfully supporting the Podcast Digest, this small independent show with their Patreon support for as little as $1 a month. You can help this show keep going, and I would really appreciate it. There's a link in the show notes if you're interested in doing that. Also like to take a quick moment. Thank this week's show sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by Fireside. It's a podcast hosting and analytics platform created by podcasters for podcasters. Fireside.fm/TPD will give you the tour and 20% off the standard plan for the first 3 months. I'll tell you more about Fireside in just a little bit. But let's get to this week's show. Barry from Podcasts in Color is my guest this week. And folks, if you're not following Barry on Twitter, you should be. And if you do, you realize why I really wanted to sit down and have a lengthy conversation with her. She's a super interesting person with a great cause, shedding light on podcasts made by persons in color. A lot of great shows she's highlighted over the years, and I've started to more aggressively start to add a lot of her suggestions to my subscription list, and I think you should be doing the same. We have a great conversation covering a range of topics, and I really think that you will enjoy it. If you do, please share it. Share it on social media. Tell your friends, and you'll hear us talk about this in just a little while, but let's use hashtag TPD for the Podcast Digest and start talking about what you think of my conversation with Barry. So hashtag TPD to talk about this or any other episode. Enough of the introduction, folks. Let's jump into the good stuff. My conversation with Barry from Podcasts in Color. All right, folks, welcome back. As I mentioned in the introduction just a few moments ago, my guest this week, one who I've been following on Twitter for a very long time and has been a great source of information for me, and somebody who I've wanted to have on for a very long time. I don't often have folks who don't host their own podcast yet, but I've done it before, and I make that exception for people who I think as opinions are you guys are going to find highly entertaining and worth talking to, and that's definitely the case with this week's show. My guest this week has produced, launched, maintained, and grown a platform for podcasts in color, podcasts that are produced, run, marketed by everything by minorities, and it is a wonderful resource out there, and it's been getting more and more and more attention, and I think it still needs more. So that's what we're doing this week. So welcome to the Podcast Digest. Barry, welcome.
Thank you for having me on. I saw that. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have a podcast.
Well, I've done it before. I mentioned it before. At the time, way back, I think episode 50, I talked with Devin Taylor. She ran the website for The Timbre, which was a podcast website that is now defunct. So I've done it before. It's not the only time, and I have review shows. And I was going to ask you to join me for a recommendation show, but then I thought, you know what, I don't want to do that because my recommendation shows, I kind of treat them like a co-host, and we both kind of bounce back and forth with shows we love. But I said, nope, I want to have a full-blown interview and conversation with you because I have lots of questions and I want to get your message out. So that's why you're here as the guest this week. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So, folks, I want to mention off the top, show notes. In this episode especially, I'm going to have an absolute ton of show notes, links, and different things that we're going to be talking about. In fact, I've already started a draft in there, and there's a couple there because, Barry, you've recently been on a rampage here lately with interview spots and things of that nature, and ironically enough, one just came out this week, and I want to mention it right off the top because, folks, I will say, really, before you even listen to this episode, I need to point you over to Dreams and Drive with Rana Campbell. Barry was just a guest there, and they had an awesome conversation, so there's a link in that. So we're going to try to cover some other territory, Barry. So before we do that, though, I want folks to get to know a little bit about you. Way before podcastincolor.com was launched, can you tell folks a little bit about yourself?
Well, I am in Denver, Colorado, and I've done, a array of things, so in customer service, and so that's kind of what I'm used to doing, and I have a lot of free time, so I joined Twitter, and through Twitter is kind of how I've learned about podcasts and the rest of everything else.
Twitter. Yes, Twitter is a favorite spot. That is where I first ran into you. But in that interview with Raina, you mentioned you were in school in Virginia, which it perked my ears up. As a lot of folks know, I'm from the Virginia Beach area. So you went to school at Hampton. Back then, when you started out in college, what were you thinking you were going to end up doing down the road?
I thought I was gonna be a book editor. I read a lot. It's just an addiction, an extensive addiction. I love paper books. So it's just something I thought I would kind of go into editing books because I did that, but it's not really the way I went.
And then podcasts came along, or did you? I imagine you still have the passion, right, for reading.
I do still have a passion. I just think the passion kind of comes differently. I don't feel like I'm the best editor. Like, I like to write, but I don't feel like I'm the best editor that comes to it, especially on grammar. I feel like my grammar is crazy. But after 2 years, I was just like, I don't think this is really what I want to do. I don't know what I would really do with going into journalism. Like, I didn't want to write about the news or anything like that. And entertainment didn't really have a passion for me. And so I ended up coming back to Denver for a couple of years, and I did real estate. I worked at my uncle's restaurant. He used to have a barbecue restaurant that was popular in Denver. And then I worked at a different call center, cell phone companies, all kinds of things. And I was working at Geek Squad, actually, like Best Buy, and I got laid off. And during the time I was laid off, I started Podcast in Color because I was at home listening to podcasts, not doing anything else but applying to jobs and listening to podcasts.
Well, that answered my next question, was how you got into podcasts in the first place. So is it just a matter of free time?
Well, I got into podcasts by listening to The Read, so with Kid Fury and Crystal, like something that was weekly. And I would say, like, before that, I used to have a nighttime job like 10 years ago, and I used to listen to Part of the Interruptions from ESPN during the night, because I was just asleep when it came out during the day. So I used to think it was cool that it was in audio form. But I would say The Read is the first one that I actually learned, like, the word podcast and, like, more the show type of thing, not like based off of.
So you started with The Read and PTI. When did it start to really expand, and why did it expand? Were you just had more time and trying to fill it?
Yes, I had more time, but I feel like, well, in Denver, like, there's not a lot of Black people. So it was kind of like I was finding other people my age that thought how I thought, but we were, like, in different places. It was kind of crazy to kind of say, like, wow, kind of somebody really just like me. That's so weird. Like, so it was kind of like I was finding that, and I was like, there's other people listening, so if we're all kind of connected like that, there's more than that. And I can't remember what kind of podcast I kind of found next, but it was just kind of like I fell down the hole of listening to other podcasts, and then just really getting addicted to them, like counting on them weekly, getting excited that they were getting bigger and actually getting paid for what they were doing. And then I was getting interested. I used to feel like I was annoying Crystal and Kid Fury. Like, they would do a contest or something, and they would do it on their regular timeline on Twitter. And I was sending that, like, hey, do it on your Twitter timeline for the podcast. And so it'd be like little things where I'm like, I don't know, it's just behind me. Like, I want people to be able to see this. I always want people to be able to find more things and make it easier. So it's just from being a fan, really brought podcasting color.
Do you think it was because of that social media interaction, you trying to connect through Twitter with some of your favorite shows, that it started to jog your mind on what more could I do?
It did, because, like, with The Read, it was really easy, of course, with their hashtag being very simple, that most people, that's what they used, even though I don't think they ever even really listened on the show for a while. So it was easy to find other fans and, like, talk about the show or send a comment, and somebody else would be so excited that, somebody found them talking about the same show that they respond. And so it's always been, I would say, like, the root of everything came from doing things around being a fan of The Read.
Gotcha. I want to jump into the site, but this thought just went off in my head, Barry. I think we may have put the cart before the horse a little bit. For anybody who hasn't heard of podcastincolor.com, let's give them the 30,000-foot view. What is it? What does it do? And tell folks what they can find there.
Okay, so podcastincolor.com is a directory, the largest directory of podcasts of color, and it has lots of different sections. I feel like when I had The Read, not everybody would love The Read, but I wanted them to find The Read. And so I feel like with having a directory where you can find podcasts, with friends talking on any state, there's different countries. London is really coming up with podcasts. So just being able to help people find business podcasts, I find inspiring and hearing other people talk to you that have done the things you're trying to do. So this is a directory where you can find podcasts on any subject by people of color.
Gotcha. Okay. I just realized we hadn't said that yet. So you get this idea and you're like, okay, I can create. Did it start as, how simple did it start in your mind? Was it just like, I'm going to create a page with a list, or did you have sort of a broader sense of what it could be, or has it just sort of taken on its life of its own? What were the thoughts right at the beginning?
I thought I created a page and I thought it would be a list, and I thought the list would be about 75 podcasts. I figured I knew about 20. I saw other lists that had others, but there was lots of doubles and that sort of thing. So I was just like, okay, could it be like 75 podcasts, 100 podcasts, something like that? Like, it's not going to be anything complicated. One page, and then people can find more podcasts. And it was like, the deeper I got into it and started searching different things, it was like, this is more than I thought. And so it's just, I don't know. It's been a lot of different changes over time, like especially like there's a million different links that people use or different programs and things like that. So it's a learning experience every day as I add new podcasts.
What hole do you think this site, as you were building it, was filling?
I felt like it was filling that most people would find the read and they would think like the read was the only thing because it was something a lot of people were talking about. And so it felt like everybody was saying, but I want a podcast on something else, or I need podcasts that I like, or, that doesn't have this. And so it felt like I was giving people a connection that they might not have, especially people that, like me, that work in workplaces where I'm like 3 Black people and like 50 and things like that, to kind of still have a connection. There's other people out there still having these same conversations that feel the same way you do. And, they're in your ears. They're just not necessarily in your face.
Now, that was when you started this. And if my research is correct, Barry, approximately April 2015, you launched this site?
Yes, it was like end of March.
End of March.
It's like some date I should know. I don't know.
It's the spring of 2015. So it's about 2 years old. About 2 years old right now. Mm-hmm. So back then, you were seeing the read as sort of the big show that people may know about, but may have trouble finding the rest. Now, tell me, am I wrong? And please correct me if I am. It seems now today when I look at especially women or people of color, there's more than one now, I would say, right? There is Another Round, 2 Dope Queens, and the read. I think maybe the big 3. You may have a different one, a better person on that. But I wonder, with those big ones that have kind of, whether it be BuzzFeed or WNYC or these larger organizations that they are part of, how do you feel that they are carrying the mantle of discovery by people of color for podcasts that they create? Do you think they're doing a good job, or do you think that one of the reasons you keep going with this is that they're just not doing enough?
I think that they're doing, what they can. Another Round actually had was putting podcasts in their newsletter that was the whole first year of their newsletter. They did a podcast spotlight where they highlighted podcasts that sent their information in. There was all types of different things, and they've talked about different ones on the show. Kid Fury and Crystal have talked about a few, and then of course they've mentioned me on the show. But both, I would say, I don't know if 2 Dope Queens have, but I believe they've had people on that have podcasts or different shows, so to bring notice to that. But I think that it's not they talk about it and they do panels, but everybody, I feel like, does what they can, and just, it's like if you find me, I feel like as hosts, they're like, I post about it or something, or I retweeted, or I've done something, like, if you want to find them, you can find them. So, I don't know, in my mind, it almost feels like they do that.
Yeah, and I mentioned some of those are some of the bigger shows, but there's also some other individual hosts, and you can apply different terms here: hosts, reporters, storytellers. I think about 2 of my previous guests, which are 2 of I've been very fortunate to meet these 2 gentlemen in person, which is Glenn Washington and Al Letson from Snap Judgment and Reveal, respectively, and they. also, I know that through their particular shows, I imagine that they don't have the opportunity to do as much light shining on some of the podcasts that you're highlighting. But how do you feel about Brittany Lewis from Sampler and Gimlet's another one? I've met her as well. All three of these in Chicago at Podcast Movement last year. But how do you think those? What would you like to see as a super fan, as a listener of podcasts, for those folks in significant roles, hosts, reporters in these other shows, in terms of them helping shine the light on some of these other creators out there?
I feel like hosts, I feel like they talk about it as much, they retweet it. Brittany even still talks about her other podcast that isn't on Gimlet. But it's more that, like, when you see a list and somebody's asking 5 podcast producers or hosts, that there's more than one podcast person, I guess, on there of color.
Right.
And so it's like, I read a lot of lists. I'm a podcast news person, I'm trying to withdraw from it, but it's just like, it feels so like hard to include, or if you include, it's like you include 2 dope queens, which I'm not against them or anything like that, but it's like, if you can include a podcast that's maybe not in the top 100 as something you found, it would kind of help. And it's not necessarily, to me, that complicated, because I feel like we're all using the same internet, so it just takes a little bit of searching, to find something else, but it can be found. So I don't know.
Yeah, I've always just been curious about that, because I think when I'm trying to remember who I spoke to. It was probably Al. I had a little more time when I spoke with Al, and I believe I asked him a question. I'm trying to remember if it was on the show or if it was in person at the bar in Chicago when I talked with him. But this very topic I mentioned to him because I think he said something to me along the lines that he liked what I was doing and helping shine the light on podcasting. And he said something to the effect of, there's a lot of creators out there that can really use this kind of help. And so I was just curious your perspective on that type of thing. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you here. As the shows grow, look at that, as your site and platform have grown over time. And do you have any idea how many shows you've got listed right now?
I don't. I know it's over 600, and I got 70 submissions in the month of March alone. So it's really, when I finish updating, which will probably be around end of this month, I'll do a count as I switch shows around and make sure I don't have reasonable.
How much time do you put in, say, a week or a month in updating and maintaining things?
I try not to think about it.
Good answer.
And it's just because I really almost do it daily. I would say right now I've been trying to take one day where I don't do anything, but usually I'm putting in probably 3 or 4 hours where I'm either updating the site, kind of reading podcast news, maybe I'm on Twitter, or I'm responding to an email about more information, or just trying to do more things with the site. So it's something I would put in energy into every day for a couple of hours.
Have you pretty much determined that you are now like a Squarespace update expert at this point?
I don't feel like I am. I feel like I should take a class on Squarespace. Like, sometimes I want to fight somebody at Squarespace, but I've gotten through it.
Because I've played around a little bit, and it's a little daunting for me. I talk a lot about the website with this show, and I've had trouble, and I tried Squarespace, and I could never get it to do exactly what I want it to. The fact that not only because I've been watching the site for maybe about a year or so, and you change it a lot visually, set up, organizationally, and I'm thinking to myself, I couldn't pull this off.
And that's really like me sitting there like, okay, I need to change the homepage, and I'm not sure exactly what I want to do. And then I play around with other things in Squarespace, and then I'm like, I hope I'm not doing this live. It's like a whole bunch of things where I'm like, am I creating this? Can other people see what I'm doing while I'm doing it? Oh, gosh. But it's really just trying to find, I want to have a whole new site at some point and do some other things, but I've just been trying to find what I like visually and what people kind of respond to. And as far as audio and how to put that in the right place so people actually engage with it.
Yeah, and I think I saw, and I'm not going to guess because I'm going to get it wrong, but originally you didn't have the categories, right? That was a later addition as you started to kind of organize things?
Correct. It was more like just a list, and I want to say I had it more in like alphabetical order, and then like I don't even know at what point that I was like, okay, I have to do things differently. That won't work anymore. So,
Yeah, because I think it was
it's
a
more,
big list when I first came across you on Twitter and looked at it. I think I remember it being a big list. Then at some point, I remember I'm like, whoa, we got categories now.
breaking it up. Yeah.
So, how did you do that? Is that part of the submission process for a podcast to identify themselves as a category, or are you actually designating it?
I do that. I've thought about doing that, but then I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of controlling things. I know it has to change at some point. I know maybe when I take a break in the winter of this year, I'll kind of change it. But I think when I do a website revamp, that's kind of I want to be able people to be able to be in a couple of different sections in a different way, or maybe you're clicking on different things, and any podcast that would come up under that category would come up. So it's just different ideas. I just right now I'm just trying to separate it out so that everybody's not in the same thing. I feel like a lot of people could be in the same category, but it's just a little bit different. So just trying to find the right thing.
So you're designating the categories. That's
Yes.
that's crazy because that means you have to know something about every show that's submitted to you. You've got to either read their description or listen to, or that adds more time, right?
I would say it kind of does, but I feel like that's part of the directory is me knowing, trying to know different podcasts or like being able to, like if I've read the description and somebody says, I'm looking for a podcast on such and such, I can say, TPD, let me try to search a term or something, like try to figure out if somebody submitted something like that, or if I know of something like that or an episode. So it kind of just helps me kind of have some frame of mind, like I might not know everything, but I'm like, wait, I've run into something like that. So maybe let me run back and I can come back to you with a podcast or two to recommend because it feels like I'm almost like a recommendation service because not everybody wants to search the whole directory. So sometimes I do try to give a couple of things without them having a search for it.
See, that's why I wanted to have you on because I just assumed people were submitting in categories. To realize that you are gaining enough knowledge about each submission to be able to put it in one of them is just amazing. That's so much work. I can't even imagine the time.
Yeah, it's pretty outrageous when you think about it. So I try not.
You try not to think about it. I'm sorry. I'm bringing you to a bad place here, Barry. I'm sorry. So there's something that you and Raina talked about just a little bit, and I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into. And it's one of the reasons I was sort of trying to paint a picture for people on the time that goes into this, and that's the topic of monetization. I know you've kicked around some ideas and so on and so forth. And I know you said that on that interview with Dreams and Drive, and folk, again, link in the show notes. If you haven't already stopped and gone back and listened to that interview, please do. That it was not a priority per se, but it was something that was sort of coming up or something you were turning more attention to nowadays, yes?
Yes, I'm thinking about it more. I just wanted to do it in a way that it was serving the purpose it should be serving, not just doing it to be doing it. If I'm going to monetize, I wanted it to have something behind it, not just regular things. I feel like anybody can do that. I feel like you go on any website and there's like all kind of pop-ups and you're trying to get away from that. And I'm like, I don't want you to leave my website because you're trying to get away from a pop-up. If there's an ad or something I want to see, is it comes up on a podcast and there's something to do with what's going on. So I just want any service I do or anything I do to be of service to something, not to just be done to be done.
So on the site today, I see there's a Squarespace donate button and a PayPal donate button. And you just recently ended a Teespring t-shirt campaign.
Yes.
So with those in place or just recently ended, what are some of the things that you might be thinking about in the future? One thing that pops in my head, I'm curious your thoughts on, and I'm sure you're well aware of being as involved in the podcast space as you are, Patreon.
I am thinking about Patreon. I can say there's an account. I haven't done anything with it or put anything to it. But that's as far as I've gotten with that. But I don't know. I've been thinking about it, but I want to have something to offer behind it. Like, what do I want to do? Being that I don't have a podcast, what kind of service do I want to do? So just kind of putting something on it that I want it to be useful and something that you're not finding anywhere that I'm reposting. I like it when you find different things on different places that aren't reposted from different things. So I really like that. about, like, if you follow somebody on Instagram, they don't repost their Snapchat, or they don't, if you see that, you see that there. So just trying to think of a way to do that and be consistent, because I feel like I do so much right now that I don't want to say, okay, I'm going to do this weekly, and then after a month I'm like, okay, I'll see you guys next week. So.
Yeah, I think all of us on Patreon have had that issue a time or two. That's for sure. Which is probably why I have a dozen people only on my Patreon at this point. It's hard. It's hard coming up with those rewards type things, but there is one very obvious thing that would make sense for you, and I'm going to open it. You knew I was going to go here with this. A perfect place to launch a very small, off the cuff, but would be awesome to hear mini podcast from Podcasts in Color and Barry. Patreon could be an initial launching space for something like that. What do you think of that?
Now that is interesting. I hadn't thought of that. That's an interesting idea.
Yeah,
that would be kind of funny to see who would tune in to that.
Well, I've listened to, I think, 3 or 4 of your other interviews in preparation for our conversation today, Barry, and I think it's something that's come up on every single one of them. So there's a clamoring out here, and anybody who follows Barry on Twitter knows she's got opinions, and she's not afraid to share them. And putting that into a podcast format for, say, Patreon supporters could be an awesome way to go. Just my 2 cents, Barry, for what it's worth.
Okay, I will take that into consideration.
I bet you'd have some folks hopping over to hear your more extended takes than 140 characters.
Probably, I would say. There's sometimes that I meet people in person and they'll mention my tweets and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have got to sign out of Twitter sometimes. Like, oh my God.
So Twitter is your primary social media interaction. Is that safe to say?
Yes.
So on Twitter, you're hashtag passionate, I will say. You've got 2 that are your primary that you use, and I want you to explain them to folks.
Yes, so I have the hashtag that is PodIn, and that's PODIN, and so that's like the pod in your ears. And so it's a now listening hashtag for podcasts for people to be able to use, and I just want to be able to track podcast listening. I feel like you see it if you're listening to one podcast and have a hashtag or something like that, but for the most part, you're searching for other podcast listeners. So that's brought something together where people can comment and people will see a comment like, oh, that sounds funny. I'll try that podcast. So it's starting a conversation. And then there's hashtag Pods in Color, PODSINCOLOR. And that's for podcast news, podcast promotion. I've seen people post different jobs, podcast jobs under that hashtag. So just something to kind of bring the community together and bring highlights to it.
So those are 2 that you've sort of built, branded, advertised through Podcasts in Color. And obviously there's, like you just outlined, 2 distinct purposes for both of them. But I know you have thoughts on podcasts themselves and their hashtag uses. Where do a lot of shows go wrong, Barry?
I feel like a lot of shows don't actually say it or promote it or use them. So it's something that some shows get. Newer shows, I would say, are getting right that are kind of younger shows, but older shows that kind of are popular are lazy on. And it's like, once you see fans actually come together, it's almost like online, the shows don't even have to do anything once fans come together. So I feel like it's something most shows should actually have and have on their media and something they put in their episode notes. And I'm a very big hashtag person.
Why do you think they should be doing this?
I think it's an easier way for people who listen on all mediums to be able to find each other. Like if you're on Instagram and that's the kind of way you kind of talk to people. If you were hashtagging the same thing, as you screenshot that you listen to the show, it's something easier for another fan to come and comment like, oh, you listen to that? Did you listen to this? And, to find other people. Maybe that show isn't on Instagram, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to find other fans and talk about the show. And then other people will see that conversation. They'll wonder why you're talking about that show. And then they'll look for the hashtag, find other links. And it just kind of brings something where the show isn't having to promote and do things by themselves, but the conversation's being started. And the hashtag usually always leads back to a link, especially if you Google them, which is what I love about hashtags, is that if you Google that, tweets will come up, I believe, if you're on mobile. And then, if the people have it on their website, the links will come out that way. So it's just an easy way without people remembering the correct spelling or different types of things to get right to a link to the podcast or other comments on it.
In addition to that, it took me a minute when I heard you and saw you on Twitter always emphasizing this. It did take me a minute for the light bulb to go off for me. And it's something I've been thinking about with my show because I don't do it. And I'm thinking I'm wrong, and I'm trying to. I think I've come around now and understand where you're coming from. And does this make sense? I want to know if this is right. It's similar to, or at least in part, that any regular Twitter user has probably run into this. Somebody in a chat. Right. So like I'm thinking about like SEO talk is one I see all the time. Right. So they'll have like regular weekly times when all of a sudden there's a bunch of people talking about something. But the only way you can really be a part of that conversation, per se, is to add on that hashtag. Is it in the vein of that, so to speak?
Exactly. So it's kind of like if you release an episode and, probably maybe 15 to 20 people that were already typing on Twitter start listening. And if they were adding a hashtag, it's like while they're listening and they heard something funny, they would just type that and then do the hashtag. You don't necessarily want to act the show like you want a response or anything, but you want people to know you were listening and, to kind of put that clip on there and still, I'm listening to this so you can kind of connect back to it.
Got it. That's what I thought, and that's what I needed was the something to connect it to that I've seen, because I think everybody's seen those chats going on at some point, and that's exactly. Really the reason why.
And it's an ongoing thing. So, if you're hashtagging, now, and if it was even only you using the tag, once somebody started using it, or if somebody happen to use the tag, and they're like, oh, I listened to the show, it leads everybody back to that hashtag and what was under that, the link to your show.
So let me just interrupt for a quick moment to tell you about this week's show sponsor. Fireside is a podcast hosting and analytics platform created by podcasters for podcasters. So what is Fireside? Fireside was started by Dan Benjamin, founder of 5x5. And he's taking everything he's learned since 2009 from making podcasts for a living and turned it into a platform for everyone. All the podcasters, whether you're an existing show or looking to starting a show, Fireside gives you the easy platform to be able to do that and to get all the great stuff along with it. What kind of great stuff? How about unlimited uploads? How about unlimited downloads for when your show becomes a massive hit? You don't have to worry about bandwidth or anything like that. Massive amounts of real-time data and analytics about your downloads. You get a super fast CDN for the best download speeds. That means when your listeners go to download your episode, it's going to pop right to them. It's going to download really quick for them. If you have multiple podcasts, Fireside can support that. If you're coming from another host like Libsyn or FeedPress, Simplecast, SoundCloud, one-click importing from all of those. If you've got your own domain already, we can custom domain map that to a beautiful, responsive website featuring all your own artwork. It's got host and guest pages. Tons of advanced features like integration with sponsors, chapter markers. Chapter markers are huge. A lot more folks are using them, and they're super convenient for your listeners. A bookmarklet for links when you're out there collecting links for your show notes. Even auto posting of future episodes, time code linking, and so much more. Fireside has this all built in. You can try it for free for 7 days, during which time you can import your existing show for free, while taking advantage of every feature Fireside has to offer during that trial. The unlimited plans start at just $19 a month, no commitment, no long-term agreement. All right? Better yet, if you go to fireside.fm/TPD right now, you'll get to take the tour and see a bunch of screenshots of all the stuff I've been talking about. And if you use the code TPD when you sign up, let them know you came from the Podcast Digest, you'll get 20% off the standard plan for the first 3 months. Fireside, it's by podcasters for podcasters. And my thanks to Fireside for supporting the Podcast Digest. Now, back to the interview. So there's one topic I got for you, Barry, and it's probably the closest thing to controversial topic I wanted to ask you about. But I've only seen you really go on and on about it in tweets, but I wanted to kind of give you the stage to sort of tell the story and really get all your thoughts on here. I really want to hear the longer version of the iTunes featured section issue that came up a couple months back that I've never... I use the word opinionated, you have opinionated, but you sounded legitimately pissed when that happened. And I'm kind of curious, what was that story? How did that all play out? And bring us through to how you feel about things today.
Well, I do love iTunes. I'll start there. I'll start there. I'm sorry. I love Apple
Apple
Podcasts
Podcast
now.
now, yes.
And the thing about, I believe you're talking about when they released in February, when they did their like Black Experience list or
Yes.
something like that, the Black Experience. And looking through it, it was very similar to my top 50 for 2016. And so, and there was just also some other things of podcast recommendations. And so it was just a lot of things that I felt were my opinions, but my name wasn't on there. And so it just felt very personal at that time. But I was glad that all the podcasts that I loved were getting shine and people were being able to find them. But it just felt like the person that was handling the page isn't aware of what's going on enough. And you can do those, but I mean, I had podcasts on my top 2016 that had stopped updating in early 2016, but I wanted them to make the list because they were good. And it was like, that's really good for a top 2016 list, but as far as people discovering podcasts, you shouldn't be including podcasts that have not updated in 6 or 7 months. Like, It tells me that you really didn't look through the list. You just kind of copied the list. Like, it was just little things like that where it was like, I believe that if you really did this list, you would have included podcasts that were currently updating, kind of went with a different sort of theme. So it was little things that kind of irritated me. Like, if you're going to use my faves, the least you could have done was reach out to me and say, okay, like, or even look at their iTunes and say, okay, if this podcast is updated in 6 months, let's find another podcast to replace it to. But it's little things that I just feel like I want somebody who's doing a job, or at least can there be a couple of people that have input if there's just one person that says maybe there's other things that you can do or consulting, but it just feels like the podcasts that the people listen to are their kind of podcast and not necessarily out of that circle.
But at that moment, it seemed to me, as a follower of yours, you were almost questioning continuing.
Like continuing, yes, with sharing podcasts, and it just felt like everything I was doing was being stolen from me and on iTunes podcasts, and that's being seen by the world. And I'm not being paid for that, but this is something I've done. And the only reason it was so crazy because the only reason I even did the top list was I was in New York for the holiday party for loudspeakers, and I was meeting with a few folks from ACAST, and we had lunch, and they were like, "You have to do a top list. You have to do a top list." And I'm like, okay, I don't really have that much time, but I have a week and I'm going to get it done. And so it was just like so much went into doing it, and to see it like come back that way, like, I don't know, it was just way too much going on. I was feeling a lot of emotions that day.
But you came through that. You calm down is probably not the right word, but that's what's popping in my head. You started to think about it a little bit differently. How did you sort of regain the calm?
I feel like anytime the things happen, I'm passionate in the moment, but I do remember, and I try to come back to that there's a reason they took my list. It's the reason they used my thoughts. I'm like, this isn't a job that I necessarily do as far as curation and getting paid for it. The things I do are necessarily just thoughts off the top of my head of, I think this should be done, or maybe I could do this. And it's like, if you see me doing that, and if iTunes sees my thoughts and, other things are done that way, I know that there's going to be a place for me in podcasting, and I can see that my influence will be big, because when I'm behind it and I can actually control what's going on, I can only imagine, the kind of things I'll be able to do and the pictures I'll be able to paint with the curated podcast that I get. Yeah.
One thought I had during that time, Barry, and maybe you thought this, I'm pretty sure others told you this, which is the only reason I didn't, which was the thought in the back of my mind was, if this list was basically carbon copied from your 2016 list or whatever the case may be, it makes me wonder, if you hadn't been doing what you were doing, I wonder if this list would have even occurred in iTunes at all. Now, I know for Black History Month, they usually have something there, but in terms of the actual shows, I wonder if the shows you highlighted were chosen to be re-highlighted there because of what you did. If that's indeed what occurred, then if nothing else, your effort got those shows attention it may not have received anywhere else. Now, was that at all something that was running through your head at some point?
Yes. Basically, but I mean, it's exactly how you said it. I attended. I don't know if we somehow met, but I attended Podcast Movement
Oh, did you?
last year, and yes, I don't know if anyone ever noticed, but like after Podcast Movement, that's kind of when you saw that it looks like the person from iTunes met more podcasts there, and it became highlighted, and different things started happening, but. I would say that really, to me, felt like a change in the iTunes page and the things that they started
You know what? I wonder if that's when I started. Remember, I said it's been about a year that I've been on the. I wonder if I did meet you, or if I got your card somewhere, or.
I don't know. And I'm sure I'm tweeting like with the hashtag.
Yeah.
A lot.
That may have been the time I started. Yeah, if you were doing the PM16 thing or something, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's probably exactly when I came across you, one way or another, virtually, or I'm pretty sure it wasn't in person. I'm pretty sure I would have remembered, but
I think so. It just feels like I don't know. I don't think so.
I'm super duper tall. So I stand out in a crowd. So. And I bring way too much attention to myself. Anyways, back to podcasting. All right, so that was that chapter. I just wanted to kind of put all that out there because I know that was a big thing. So I want to talk about the future.
Okay. One thing,
sure.
just to make sure, is that someone from there did, like they had a position that was going on at the time, did kind of say that they did want to put my name in the pile. And so they do notice me, and they did say, like, as far as that position, which I believe has been filled, is that, they did put my name out there, that they did think that, I was somebody that would be able to do the position. So that was pretty cool.
That's good. That's awesome. Yeah, and it's interesting. Before I go to future, let's just talk a little bit about world of podcasting, because it seems like things are changing all the time now. I'm kind of curious, what do you think are in any topic, whether it be discovery, diversity, or just generally podcasting, what do you think are some of the things that you'd like to see get better in the next 1 to 3 years?
I hope discovery gets better, but I'm not even sure what can be had done. It's going to be talking about podcasts on other podcasts and things like that, not necessarily just guesting, but it's going to be listeners figuring out where to discover. So I can always, when listeners find me, they're like, oh my God, there's something like this. And even when I meet people that I would say a lot in Denver, I've met a lot of white podcast listeners, they're still like, where do I find podcasts and stuff like that. So discovery is a big thing, and people trying to figure out who to trust as far as curation and what's really good and things like that.
What are your thoughts on ads?
I like ads. I don't have a problem with ads. I do too. I love my 15-second button on different ads, but I would say I listen to different ones to kind of figure out what I like or what I don't like, what I'll let play if I, just walking around and not necessarily running to my phone and say, oh, I got 15 minutes. So I like them. I feel like they're great. They're better than radio, because I've listened to the radio where it's like 10 to 15 minutes, and I'm like, oh my God, will this ever be over?
Right.
So, yeah.
and I think you talked about this with the conversation with Raina as well, but especially when hosts kind of get into it, make it different, variety, especially if they add humor or whatever the case may be, some of this can be entertaining.
Yes, I like that. I like it when they get involved, or like they ate the chips, or they're talking about something, they're like, no, I really like that. Or, they stop in the middle of the ad, like, no, but I like this. Did you try this? And it's like, oh, you guys are really, like that, or they, you're using it. So it's kind of cool to know it was used at some point, or that they really liked it, or somebody came back and said it was trash. They were like, no, but I used it, so I know it's not like that. So.
Do you think, in terms of podcast monetization, for whether they're any type of show of any size, do you think ads will continue to be the monetization plan moving forward, or do you think things like Patreon or subscription models are potentially going to become, or membership sites become bigger players in the future? Where do you see things going?
I think ads are going to be bigger. I wish that really people had started thinking of membership sites before. I think it's a good idea, but so many people do it. The way it would have to be done, at least the way I think about it, would have to be really great. There's just things about people that have sites already that you would pay for that I'm like, it's not enough for me to pay monthly. But I feel like the ads, more people are going to have to reach out locally. I've been really thinking like locally. If you have local listeners and things like that, or where you can kind of influence that people aren't, like not everybody is, doing the bed thing or doing a website. Some people are doing windows. Some people like candles. There's just
Right.
like a whole bunch of different things that people I think aren't even thinking of that they could be advertising that people will buy online and are like, I would like that. So.
Now, this kind of connects, and one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about the advertising stuff was recent tweets that I've seen coming out of you in the last day or so made me think about this, and I'm wondering your thoughts. When you talk about local ads, now what you're talking about, and it is two conversations I've had recently, well, ever aging recently, some episodes back. I had Julie Shapiro from Radiotopia and Hernan Lopez from Wondery both talk about targeting, and using localization metadata from the phone that basically identifies where you are locally and could potentially serve you, a dynamically inserted ad if it's on a platform like Art19, and that's what you've been tweeting about here recently. So when you talk about local ads, now you could potentially be looking at, yes, from what I've heard from Hernan and Julie, yes, they're looking at things like that, but to do so, they've got to get data off the listener, off the device to be able to insert things like that. What are your thoughts? Are you comfortable with things like that in terms of a lot of the data sharing that a lot of these advertisers want?
I feel like there's so many line crossing with ads already. I'm not even sure what can be stopped, and that's a little bit scary at some point. But I just feel like there's just, I don't know. I feel like I see ads. If I'm searching for something, I see ads there on like every website I go to on my phone and everything. If I did anything on the internet,
you buy something on Amazon, you'll look at it for 2 weeks.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of complicated, but I feel like if you're giving me an opt-in, like I know I do. TV, I stream TV through my phone a lot, and they let you opt in to a different couple of things depending on if I'm using Xfinity or Uverse, of what you want to be tracked or not. I would kind of rather that because I feel like a lot of things I do with my phone, I don't have the location turned on, so if I'm in Philadelphia or something, and it's like, I don't want some ad company for podcasts feeling like they're giving me ads in Philadelphia because they feel like they're reaching me. And I'm like, no, I don't have that turned on for a reason. So.
Yeah. So many interesting things happen in the future. I was just wanted to throw a few of those out there at you to get your perspective because.
And I still haven't figured out Art19. I'm figuring it out. Do you listen to any shows that use it?
Well, the whole Wondery platform is on Art19. That I know.
So do they have their own like webpage like that you would go to and search for podcasts and listen on the thing? I don't know. I just couldn't figure it out. From
what I understand, it's so I host with Libsyn. A lot of shows host with Libsyn, right? Or Blueberry or Podbean or what have you. Or this week's show sponsor, Fireside. Had to get in there. So those are just sort of, they're serving the files out to Pocket Cast, out to Overcast, out to the Apple Podcast Player, all of those. So Art19 is one of those. It basically serves the file, but what it does is some unique things, and it's doing it to collect a lot of the metadata, like we were just talking about. It dynamically inserts ads and produces a lot more metadata for the host and owner and listener so that they can know things like when people drop off, when they skip, what ads are not being skipped, what ads are, and then they can use timed ads, which is interesting. When I was talking to Hernan Lopez and Wondery, and that's an interview, folks, I had a few months back, he's talking about things like during the month of November, they could insert holiday ads. So if Walmart wanted to buy a podcast ad, but they only wanted to run during November, then they could pull out the ad previously and insert that ad in the month of November if you're listening to a show hosted on the Art19 platform. And advertisers will pay for that because it's relevant and it's timed, and it allows things to build a back catalog. So now, you could be listening to a show from 2 years ago if you're blasting through somebody's back catalog, but you're usually hearing an ad read 2 years ago. Now they can pull that out and insert another one, and they're all host read ads, right? Just a more current version. So that's basically that, and all the data that goes back is what Art19 is doing. And there's others doing this, but that's one of the reasons. That's one of the things they do. It's an interesting thing they got going on there, and it makes.
I guess I just don't get it because I feel like with listen shows, I know I can go to listen.com or like search the show with listen, and that link will come up, and I can, like there's a page there and stuff like that. Is it like that with Art19?
I don't believe so. I could be wrong, but I don't believe
it's
so.
Just every time I feel like I click on it or like the show shares it with it, it's like I can only listen to it there and I can't carry it other places. I don't know. It's just the links are weird, and I'm just like, I don't get it. I don't understand.
Yeah.
So I just usually listen on Pocket Cast or something
now,
like that.
I believe on Wondery's website, and I know there are other shows using the Art19 platform. Wondery is just the one I know that is all Art19. That the front-facing listening on their show pages are SoundCloud, but it's linking back to the Art19 file. So if you're trying to go like through an Art19 site or an Art19 link, it's kind of weird to do it that way because I don't think it was ever designed to do that. So I just think it's a matter of if you listen to a show like a Wondery show, whether you're listening on SoundCloud, Pocket Cast, Apple Pocket, whatever, it's being served from the Art19 server.
And I feel like that's my confusion with it. And because of that, it doesn't help me. Like, I feel like with different shows, you know, like some people have Podbean, as I said, listen or whatever. I feel like people give me a link to share with other people, and I'm like, I know no matter what they're publishing on this platform, so no matter what, you know, this is what you go to. And like with Art19 shows, I'm like, I don't know, like if it's always going to show up on Stitcher. If they change something, it's not going to show up there. I remember, I'm trying to think, it was some show that I was listening to on Acast, and they stopped publishing where it wasn't coming up there, and I was like, okay, so where is it coming up now? Like, where is your original publishing place? It was just like a mess in my head.
Yeah.
Like, so you always putting me through stress to be a listener.
And you know what, Barry? I think we're going to get more of that. Honestly, when you're starting to see shows now exclusively out on Stitcher Premium or starting out, Stitcher's just now mid-roll, aka Stitcher just released their publishing platform. You know, they're going to start having their own shows. You see things like Missing Richard Simmons was coming out first on Stitcher. Previous guests from a few weeks ago, Mira Burt-Wintonic, Crystal Duhame, they have Pen Pals, which is exclusive to Stitcher Premium. And you're going to start to see, I think, and of course, Audible has shows that are just on Audible.
I saw that. Somebody sent me one. I haven't got a chance to check it out, like yesterday from Audible.
Yeah.
So.
I think we're going to see more and more like that. It's going to be like the Netflix show, the Hulu show, you know, where you just have to go to that platform to hear it. And it's the, the democratization, if you will, of some of these folks. And then, you know, there are people trying to get them over to their subscription model, and they are giving big time producers, you know, sort of a budget and a timeline to kind of flex their creativity muscles and then holding it on their own platform for everyone.
I feel like my one thing is like hoping that people get on that thing of being able to give guest memberships. There was a company that I asked if they had guest memberships like during the holidays, because I was just trying to think of some giveaways to do to just get people more involved in interacting on Twitter. And when I emailed them, they said that wasn't something they had set up yet. And I'm still in shock. And I even Googled it the other day, and I didn't find anything. So who knows? And so I was just like, but if you don't give me the power to be able to say I can give away 5 guest memberships with no problem and not linking my information to their information, all kind of stuff, like, you know, what is the point of this? So I really hope that people think about that as they're building these companies, because I don't think it's necessarily the thought process.
Yeah, I know. I think that's a great idea. You're right, especially in terms of a giveaway. I'm thinking about apps, right? Like, you know, the free download codes, you know, for apps. You know, I remember the little Starbucks cards. You used to be able to get a free app of the week or whatever. Maybe they could do that type of thing, like a code to give out for a free 2 or 3 month membership or something. That'd be awesome.
Exactly. Like, I feel like I could gift on iTunes, but necessarily I would love something that wasn't necessarily connected or anything, you know, just like this is a card or something that's separate that's already paid for it. So.
Well, that's a great idea for the future. And that was where I was going before we got off in this sort of general podcasting landscape conversation, which I could go on for ever. But let's talk about let's tie this up with the future of podcasts in color. The site yourself, what are some of the ideas percolating in the back of your brain? I'm not going to hold you to anything, but just, workshop some things that you've been considering for the future.
I want to do a newsletter. My one thing is that I really wanted it to be an audio newsletter, but I'm finding that complicated to do, or I haven't figured it out. And so I just wanted something that's more audio-based. I don't want to see a lot of words. So I'm trying to figure out what I can do that's different, that you can be really involved in, like listening to the podcast or hear a clip of it or something like that. I want to do some type of podcast or some type of audio something at some point. I want to do some live events where we're kind of like podcast meetups or like podcast brunches where listeners get to talk to each other and things like that. So, and I'm going to be doing something like that at the end of May with Spotify. I believe that's what it's going to be, with Spotify for women of color. So there's just some other things coming that I more involved with connecting people.
That's awesome. And people should follow you to hear all of this upcoming stuff, yes?
Yes, everything is under the same name, podcast with an S in color, on Instagram, Facebook, the website, Twitter. I ran a lot, all over places.
Barry's a must follow on Twitter, folks. I mean, if you haven't already done it, click it in the show notes. Just click follow and just wait. You're not going to have to wait long. Just wait. You will see. I say that in jest, but I also do mean it very seriously. She says a lot of awesome things, makes a lot of great observations, and probably most importantly, draws a lot of attention to a lot of shows that don't get enough. So she's definitely a must follow. So.
Thank you. I just feel like, there's so many things. You just said that, and I'm like, I remember the rant I did on somebody not having episode names, where it's just like episode 1, episode 2, and it's like, why do I take these things so personally? I don't know.
Well, as a show host, producer, what following you does, and it's not every single thing, but more often than not, it will cause you as a host to think, how does that apply to my show? Can that be applied? Is this something I'm doing? Because if nothing else, you've got an enthusiastic, passionate listener here who is sharing feedback and observations that may or may not be applicable to your show, but you should be listening and you should be going through a mental checklist if there's a way to apply it. And that's the way I've always taken my follow of you. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, like you were saying, I think one of the frustrations for a lot of show hosts is sometimes we don't always get as much feedback as we would like, for one reason or another, whatever the case may be. And any feedback sometimes, if it's not even generally about my show, but just about the space in general from a listener perspective, I consider valuable. So
that is good. I feel like a lot of people say that, especially hosts, like they're looking for feedback or what should they change and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think, when I think about podcasts in color, just to throw my unrequested 2 cents in, when you talk about that, I would love to see something like forums. That would be super cool.
I've been thinking about that, how to handle it. Joining the new podcast group on Facebook, the New York Times,
yes,
has really given me different thoughts of like what could happen. So I don't know, something going there. It's a little something growing.
Could be a lot of work too. Monitoring, keeping out idiots.
The things I think of, I'm like, the things I think of to do for free. Why am I doing this? I have to think of different ways.
Well, there are things that I think that I don't think you're going to be doing this for free too much longer. I think that there's a few things that I think you've already played around with, whether it be merchandising, whether it be that podcast, whether it be Patreon. I think it's just going to be a question of sort of which one you want to throw the full effort into. And then I think once you do that, especially you've grown so much just in the last year that I've been around, in terms of your follower count, in terms of the number of shows on the site. I don't think you're going to be penniless with this effort too much longer. I think it's just going to be a question of sort of what you want to throw that pursuit into. But that's what I think.
I believe so too. I do believe that also.
Well, folks, Barry, I want to thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time to join me and talk about this. Before I go, though, I got so derailed with everything. Can you give us a handful of awesome shows that maybe you haven't mentioned recently that you would like to shine a light upon? Because I want to get these links in my show notes because, like I said, I mentioned recently on Twitter, I'm now a Dreams and Drive subscriber. Raina's interview style was awesome. I've got the latest episode of my queue now. And so whether it be for me or the full audience, what are some other awesome ones? And the links will be in the show notes.
Okay. Let's see here. I was going to be ready for the start. Okay. There's a podcast by Anthony Frazier called Don't Dumb Down Your Greatness. There's great interviews on it that I really do love. There's a podcast I love getting great advice from, and they tell people that like do conferences and I don't know, just like people from all different types of business types. It's called Heart and Hustle Podcast. And it's 2 ladies, and I just feel like they're so lighthearted. It's pretty funny a lot of the time. There's one, and I met somebody the other day, and they mentioned it back to me, so I was like, people really do like this. Paychecks and Balances, and they talk about money and, like, how to get out of debt, and they both got out of debt themselves, so they've given those steps.
That is a great show name, by the way. That's awesome.
Yes, Paychecks and Balances.
That's awesome.
So it's like about getting your money right. So it's pretty cool.
Sometimes some of those show titles just hit you, and you're like, perfect. Why didn't I think of that? Like, that's a good one. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Like, how did you workshop? You want to ask them, like, how many did you go through?
Yeah, no, that's a really good one. Paychecks about. I like that. I'm sorry. Continue, please.
Black Girl Nerds, and they're really building a forum. I know they're going to do like a conference they put together next year that was totally crowdfunded. But Black Girl Nerds, I feel like they get all the best interviews from movies to TV of like black shows and shows of color, even Netflix shows. Like all the stars end up calling them, and even Ava DuVernay's been on the show. So
Nice.
I feel like it's a pretty good show to try. And there's something smaller. I don't know if I mentioned Call Your Girlfriend on the other show.
They have been recommended on this show before, on one of those recommendation shows I mentioned at the top. One of my co-hosts did recommend Call Your Girlfriend way back when. I'd have to check my show notes, but yep.
And there's a new show that I've been checking out. I know they do kind of video too, but their podcast is called Something's Wrong on the Internet. SWOCI is like all their social media, the initials of it. But a fun show with two male and female co-hosts that talk about politics and other things.
Awesome. Well, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shows there, folks.
There you go.
And I'm going to have links to all of them. I'll put their site and their Twitter in the show notes as well. So, sorry, I forgot those. I didn't mean to. We just got into so many other things, but those links are in there as well. So, once again, Barry, thank you for the input. Thank you for the conversation, and thanks for doing what you're doing. It's already added to my subscription list a couple of times, and I'm sure it'll be doing that again moving forward. So, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you for asking me on. Thank you for reaching me out a couple of times. And then I finally made it.
We made it happen. So, and folks, that will do it for episode 138. What did you think? Barry is awesome. I could have talked to her for so much longer, and we actually did talk for a little bit after the recording as well. Super interesting person doing something that I think is really important, and she's just a super fan listener of all things podcasts, which is why I think I get along so great with her. I consider myself the same. So thanks, Barry, for coming on, and folks, if you enjoyed that conversation, again, use hashtag TPD, talk about it, share the episode, put it on Facebook, put it on Twitter, put it on Instagram, hashtag TPD to talk about this week's guest, Barry from Podcasts in Color. Once again, folks, if you like the show, please tell everybody you know. And I want to take a quick moment and thank this week's show sponsor one more time, Fireside. It's a podcast hosting and analytics platform created by podcasters for podcasters. Fireside.fm/TPD. 20% off the standard plan for the first 3 months, folks. And my thanks again to Fireside for supporting the podcast digest. Folks, that'll do it for episode 138. 139 will be on the way 1 week from now, or this coming Sunday, if you're listening anytime during the week. The podcast digest released Sunday mornings. Every Sunday mornings, I'm something like approaching 70 consecutive releases, and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon. Subscribe, tell a friend, leave a review on iTunes. Takes just a moment and really would help me out, folks. Until then, next time, my name is Dan Lizette for the Podcast Digest.